Ottis Toole's name is etched into the dark annals of American criminal history, known for his disturbing partnership with fellow serial killer Henry Lee Lucas and his connection to some of the most heinous crimes of the late 20th century. Born into a life of abuse, neglect, and exposure to violence, Toole's troubled upbringing set the stage for the brutal path he would follow. His involvement in multiple murders, including the infamous case of 6-year-old Adam Walsh, shocked the nation and left a lasting scar on families and communities. Despite his reputation, Toole's confessions were often riddled with inconsistencies, leading investigators on a twisted journey to separate fact from fiction. This is the unsettling story of Ottis Toole, how a man forged by hardship and hatred became one of America's most notorious killers.
Ottis Elwood Toole was born on March 5, 1947, in Jacksonville, Florida, into a household plagued by dysfunction and abuse. His upbringing was far from ordinary. Shaped by a mother who was deeply religious and prone to violent outbursts, and a grandmother who allegedly practiced Satanism. This toxic environment exposed Toole to a world of instability and fear from a very young age. Toole's mother frequently dressed him in girls' clothing and forced him to wear makeup as a form of punishment. This humiliation deeply affected Toole's developing psyche and contributed to the gender confusion and anger he expressed later in life. His grandmother, known as Mama Dragus, further complicated his childhood by involving him in disturbing occult rituals, reinforcing a fascination with death and destruction. Toole's academic life was equally troubled. He struggled with severe learning disabilities and was diagnosed with a low IQ, making it difficult for him to keep up in school. His peers bullied him mercilessly, isolating him further from society. As a result, he dropped out of school at a young age, turning to the streets to escape his abusive home life. Signs of psychological disturbance began to manifest early. Toole became known for his obsession with fire, frequently setting small blazes around his neighborhood. This fascination eventually grew into full-scale arson, which would later become a hallmark of his violent crimes. Setting fires gave him a sense of power and control, something he had been denied throughout his life. In addition to arson, Toole exhibited other troubling behaviors linked to the infamous McDonald triad of childhood indicators for future violent offenders: cruelty to animals, bedwetting, and fire setting. His destructive tendencies seemed to escalate, foreshadowing the violence that would eventually define his adult years. Toole claimed that by the time he was a teenager, he had already committed his first murder, though there is little verifiable evidence to support this claim. According to Toole, he killed a traveling salesman who had propositioned him for sex, marking the beginning of his descent into serial violence. Whether this was true or another fabrication, Toole's fantasies of killing grew stronger over time. By his late teens, Toole had become a drifter, frequently traveling between different states. He engaged in petty crime, ranging from burglary to theft, gradually escalating to more violent acts. His transient lifestyle allowed him to evade authorities, contributing to his ability to commit crimes undetected. In the 1970s, Toole crossed paths with Henry Lee Lucas, another drifter with a similarly violent past. The two men quickly formed a bond based on their shared hatred of society and mutual desire for chaos. Their relationship evolved into a deadly partnership, leading to a series of brutal murders across the United States. Lucas later described their killing sprees as recreational, claiming that they killed simply for the thrill of it. The pair often targeted vulnerable individuals, hitchhikers, sex workers, and runaways whom they believed no one would miss. Their partnership became one of the most infamous killer duos in American history. Despite his troubled background, Toole's violent tendencies cannot solely be attributed to his abusive upbringing. Psychologists believe that his innate lack of empathy, combined with his volatile environment, contributed to his evolution into a serial killer. Toole later admitted to feeling no remorse for his actions, describing murder as a form of entertainment. By the time Toole was finally apprehended, he had left behind a trail of destruction that spanned several states. His early life provided insight into the making of a killer-an individual shaped by abuse, neglect, and a burning desire to inflict pain on others. Ottis Toole's first confirmed murder occurred in the mid-1970s, though he claimed to have killed much earlier. In 1976, he murdered a traveling salesman in Nebraska, setting the man's car on fire to destroy evidence. Arson became a recurring element in Toole's crimes, as he found pleasure in watching the destruction unfold. This murder marked the beginning of a decade-long killing spree that would leave authorities struggling to track Toole's movements. With Henry Lee Lucas often by his side, the pair engaged in cross-country rampages, leaving bodies in their wake. They rarely stayed in one location for long, which made connecting the murders difficult. The most infamous case linked to Toole was the 1981 abduction and murder of 6-year-old Adam Walsh, son of America's Most Wanted host John Walsh. Adam was taken from a Sears store in Florida, and his decapitated head was discovered 2 weeks later. Though Toole confessed to the crime multiple times, inconsistencies in his statements created doubts. Investigators found elements of Toole's confession credible. He described details not released to the public, but a lack of physical evidence made it challenging to convict him. For years, the Walsh family lived without closure, haunted by unanswered questions surrounding Adam's death. It wasn't until 2008, long after Toole's death, that authorities officially closed the case, naming him as Adam's killer. Toole and Lucas claimed responsibility for hundreds of murders, but law enforcement struggled to determine which confessions were genuine and which were fabrications. The pair often exaggerated their body count, reveling in the attention their crimes brought them. In many instances, they confessed to murders they could not have committed. Despite the difficulty in verifying every claim, Toole's involvement in at least 6 murders was confirmed. His victims included individuals he met during his travels, as well as strangers he targeted randomly. Toole's impulsivity and lack of planning made his crimes chaotic, often leaving behind crucial evidence that would later implicate him. In 1983, Toole's violent spree came to an end when he was arrested for arson and attempted murder in Florida. While in custody, he confessed to multiple murders, but his statements were riddled with inconsistencies. Investigators faced the challenge of separating truth from lies, as Toole frequently recanted his confessions. During his trial, prosecutors focused on the physical evidence linking Toole to several murders. His fascination with fire and destruction played a pivotal role in establishing his pattern of behavior. Ultimately, Toole was convicted of 6 counts of murder and sentenced to death, though his sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. Toole's health deteriorated in prison, and in 1996, he died of liver failure. His death brought an end to a chapter of violence, but his legacy continued to cast a shadow over American criminal history. The Adam Walsh case, in particular, remained one of the most tragic examples of Toole's brutality. In 2008, long after Toole's passing, the Walsh family finally received closure, when law enforcement officially named him as Adam's killer. Though justice was delayed, the case served as a reminder of the far-reaching impact of Toole's crimes. Ottis Toole's reign of terror left an indelible mark on American society, highlighting the importance of addressing early warning signs of violent behavior. His life and crimes remain a case study in how unchecked trauma, abuse, and psychological instability can manifest into devastating violence.
All right, strap in, everybody. Today we are going deep, really deep into the life of Ottis Toole.
You know, a name that sends chills down your spine. A name synonymous with pure evil.
And we are going to try to figure out what made him tick. How did he become the monster that terrorized so many?
We have biographical info, case files, the whole 9 yards.
Let's jump right in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Ottis Toole was born in 1947 in Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah, and from what I've read about his childhood, it was like something straight out of a nightmare.
Seriously, his early life was just, well, disturbing is an understatement.
His mother, she was deeply religious, yeah, but also incredibly abusive.
Both physically and mentally, right?
Sadly, yes,
Oh.
both. There are even accounts of her forcing Ottis to dress as a girl.
Wow, that's just... I mean, you have to wonder about the psychological impact of that kind of upbringing.
Absolutely. How does something like that shape a young mind? It's unthinkable.
And then there's the grandmother, Mama Driggers.
Right, Mama Driggers. Allegedly involved in some pretty dark stuff, like occult practices.
It's like layer upon layer of darkness and dysfunction.
It really makes you think about the environment that breeds this kind of evil.
And speaking of disturbing behaviors, this is where the McDonald triad comes in.
Yes. The McDonald triad, a chilling set of behaviors that often, not always, but often, point to a propensity for violence later in life.
So for those who aren't familiar, break it down for us. What is the McDonald triad exactly?
So it's a triad of 3 specific behaviors in childhood: cruelty to animals, bedwetting, and fire setting.
Okay, so 2 of those, yeah, those make sense, but bedwetting. How does that fit in?
It might seem strange at first, but all 3 can be signs of a child trying to cope with, immense stress and trauma.
So it's like a cry for help almost.
Yeah, in a way, it's a way of exerting control, like with the cruelty to animals, or, a manifestation of deep-seated anxiety like bedwetting and fire setting.
That's a whole other can of worms.
For sure. It can often indicate a fascination with destruction, with seeing things burn.
The scary part is that Ottis exhibited all 3 of these behaviors as a kid.
And that fire setting, yeah, it became a constant throughout his life, almost like a dark signature.
And I guess that brings us to his meeting with Henry Lee Lucas in the 1970s.
Ah, yes, Henry Lee Lucas, another drifter, another troubled soul. A match made, well, not in heaven, that's for sure.
2 peas in a very, very dark pod.
They found each other and formed this bond, this shared hatred of society, a thirst for chaos, a fascination with death.
Lucas actually described their killings as recreational, like it was a lobby.
That's chilling. Just chilling. To think that taking a life could be seen as entertainment.
And they preyed on the vulnerable. Hitchhikers, runaways, people who they thought wouldn't be missed.
People on the fringes of society. Makes it even more disturbing, honestly.
And then there's the case that brought Ottis Toole into the national spotlight. The Adam Walsh case.
1981, 6-year-old Adam Walsh abducted from a shopping mall in Florida.
His father, John Walsh, of course, went on to become the host of America's Most Wanted.
It was a case that gripped the nation. The image of that little boy, the sheer horror of what happened.
And Ottis Toole confessed to this crime. More than once, right?
Yeah, multiple times. He even knew things that hadn't been released publicly, but his stories were always...
inconsistent.
Exactly, full of inconsistencies. So it was hard for investigators to separate truth from fabrication.
So how did investigators even begin to untangle this mess, this web of truth and lies?
They had to start with what they could prove. Physical evidence, witness statements, anything that could corroborate or refute his claims.
Like a giant puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Exactly. But, that fascination with fire that we talked about, well, it ended up being a crucial piece of the puzzle in several cases.
Wow. So even in his darkness, there was a thread that led back to him.
In a way, yes. His own twisted obsessions became his undoing.
That's a lot to take in. We need a break to process all of this. We'll be back in a flash to delve even deeper into the disturbing world of Ottis Toole. Man, the more we dig into this, the more unsettling it gets. Ottis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas confessing to hundreds of murders.
It's almost unfathomable, the scale of their alleged crimes.
So how do investigators even begin to sift through all of that? I mean, how do you separate fact from fiction with that much noise?
It was a logistical nightmare for sure, like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is on fire and constantly shifting.
I can't even imagine. What was their approach?
They had to be incredibly meticulous. Every confession, every detail had to be cross-referenced. Physical evidence, witness statements, anything that could corroborate or contradict what Toole was saying.
So they couldn't just take his word for it, obviously.
Absolutely not. Each confession was treated as a potential starting point for a whole new investigation.
And out of all those claims, all those confessions, how many murders were actually linked to Ottis Toole?
Well, a lot of his claims remain unverified, but investigators were able to definitively connect him to at least 6 murders.
6 confirmed murders. It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
And what makes it even more disturbing is that there wasn't really a specific type of victim.
So no pattern, no profile?
Not really. Some were people he encountered during his travels, drifters, hitchhikers.
People who might have even shown him kindness, offered him a meal or a place to stay?
Right. And then others seem to have been chosen completely at random, just a sudden impulsive act of violence.
It makes it seem even more senseless, like it could have been anyone, anywhere, at any time.
And that randomness, that lack of a clear motive, makes it all the more terrifying.
So going back to that question we keep coming back to, what drives someone to do this, to kill so indiscriminately? Is it really just pure evil?
It's a question that has haunted humanity for centuries, hasn't it? What creates a monster? And with Ottis Toole, it seems like it was a perfect storm of factors.
The childhood abuse, the exposure to the occult, his own psychological makeup. It's all connected.
Right, but even with all of that, there's still that unanswered question. Why him? Why did he choose this path when others who have experienced trauma find a way to cope, to heal?
It's that unknown element that makes this whole thing so disturbing.
The human psyche is a complex and often terrifying landscape, and sometimes there just aren't easy answers.
So how did it all end? This reign of terror. I mean, how did Ottis Toole finally get caught?
Ironically, it wasn't for any of the high-profile murders he confessed to. In 1983, he was arrested in Jacksonville, Florida for arson and attempted murder.
So even when he wasn't directly taking lives, he was still drawn to that destruction.
It's like that impulse, that need to burn was always simmering beneath the surface.
I mean, it was actually that same obsession with fire that helped bring him down, right?
Exactly. Investigators were able to use arson evidence to link him to several murders. It was a key piece of the puzzle.
Almost like his own demons betrayed him in the end.
You can say that, yes. And once he was in custody, the confessions, they just started pouring out.
So even behind bars, he was still playing games, trying to control the narrative.
It was all about attention, notoriety, even if it meant admitting to crimes he might not have committed.
The desperate need to be seen, even if it was for all the wrong reasons.
And despite the inconsistencies, the contradictions in his statements, investigators were able to corroborate enough evidence to secure convictions on 6 counts of murder.
6 confirmed murders. That's a lot of lives lost.
He was initially sentenced to death, but later that was commuted to life in prison.
Life in prison for 6 confirmed murders, and who knows how many others.
And there's another twist to the story. Ottis Toole didn't actually serve out his full life sentence.
Right.
He died in prison in 1996 from liver failure.
Wow. So in a way, his own body failed him, consumed by the same forces of destruction that he had unleashed on others.
It's almost poetic in a macabre sort of way.
It's definitely a lot to process. Ottis Toole's life, his crimes, they leave you with more questions than answers.
It's a journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche, a glimpse into the abyss.
Well, we've certainly gone down a rabbit hole today with this deep dive into Ottis Toole's life.
A very dark and twisted rabbit hole.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, he really makes you question everything you thought you knew about human nature.
It's a stark reminder that evil can wear many faces. It can be lurking right next door, disguised as normalcy.
And that's what's so terrifying about it, right?
Yeah.
You know, how do you even spot that? How do you prevent something like this from happening?
It's not easy, that's for sure. But I think the key takeaway here is awareness.
Awareness
Of the signs, the red flags, the things that might indicate that someone is, struggling, that they're heading down a dark path.
like a McDonald triad, for example.
Exactly. Cruelty to animals, bedwetting, fire setting. These behaviors, while not a surefire predictor of future violence, they can be indicators of a child in distress.
So it's about being more attuned to those signs, recognizing that they could be a cry for help.
Right. And early intervention is key. The sooner we can address these issues, the better chance we have of preventing tragedy down the line.
It's about creating an environment where kids feel safe, supported, where they feel like they can speak up if something's wrong.
Absolutely. It takes a village, as they say. We all have a role to play in protecting our children and preventing violence.
And that brings us back to that question we posed at the beginning. Can we really learn anything from a life like Ottis Toole's?
I think the answer is a resounding yes. We can learn to be more vigilant, more compassionate, more aware of the subtle signs of distress in others.
So it's about turning this darkness, this horrific story, into something positive, something that can actually make a difference.
Right. Because if we can prevent even one child from suffering the same fate as Ottis Toole's victims, then all this exploration into the darkness will have been worth it.
It's about finding that glimmer of hope amidst the shadows.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful message to end on. We've delved deep into the dark heart of Ottis Toole, but we've also seen the potential for good, for change.
We've explored the horrific crimes, the twisted psychology, the lingering questions.
But we've also found reasons for hope, reasons to believe that we can make a difference.
And that's what we need to hold on to. The belief that we can create a better world, a safer world, for ourselves and for future generations.
Because in the end, the choice is ours. We can choose to succumb to the darkness, or we can choose to fight for the light.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this journey, folks. It's been a heavy one, but hopefully a thought-provoking one as well.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the darkness, the better equipped we are to fight against it.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.